your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein. Open the floodgates. Hit the starter's gun. Free agent frenzy has finally begun. Kicked off this morning with a bang and continues to have just these after effects of a day that in a certain position we did not expect to happen, but free agent frenzy is officially kicked off. And we have a lot to talk about as it relates to the Chargers because it took them a little while to get going this morning, but the Chargers finally got some moves underneath their belt, ones that were much needed in some very key positions, of course. And we're going to talk about what the expectations are going to be within the next 24 to 48 hours as it relates to some other moves that could be happening on the roster. But of course, before we delve into that, obviously everybody that's in the comments, thank you so much for joining. Feel free to start coming with the questions. You guys are obviously drive this show. When Dan and I do these live shows, they are always based on what you want. But Dan Wolkenstein, how are you, sir?
Ooh, we've made it. Free agency frenzy. We have made it. Chargers fans, welcome to Chargers Unleashed live edition. We love these. These are probably our favorite episodes, like Jake said. This comment is with you, for you, by you. So any questions, topics, thoughts you'd like us to discuss, we are going to do our best to weave them in and out of the conversation today. Tons to discuss, kind of the key pillars of conversation. The three guys the Chargers signed today, or at least agreed to terms today, as well as big looming decisions coming and maybe some guys and some players that may be good fits for this team moving forward. But Jake, I think what was interesting, and Chargers fans, keep me honest here, but 12:01 Eastern Standard Time. Chargers fans were up, scrolling through Twitter, waiting for the news to drop from Shefty Bombs and such. And when those big ticket names started coming off the board, Chargers fans, not all of them, but many Chargers fans were getting a little nervous. We're wondering what the new GM and what the new head coach were doing. And we're wondering why we're not making any moves and what's going on and all it. And I think sometimes it's very easy to lose sight of like the realities of these situations. And the reality of the situation is new regime with Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh, new era of Chargers football. And they're doing things their way. And maybe Chargers fans aren't used to, like, I don't know, responsible decision-making from the top. I don't know, maybe not. But given where the Chargers currently are, again, remember, they're still well over the salary cap right now. Decisions to come. But the theme for me today, Jake, was value and targeted missile strikes, high value, high impact players that are going to be impacting this season and seasons to come at a price that was equal or less than some of the big names that Chargers fans were wanting and were begging for, i.e. a Saquon Barkley, a Josh Jacobs, a Christian Wilkins, some of these crazy names. So tons here. But off the top, Jake, I think this was a great day for Chargers fans, Chargers team themselves. Alohi Gilman, Will Dissly, Gus Edwards, now Chargers for the next few years. Jake, what were your kind of top key immediate takeaways of those three? We'll get into all of them specifically, but overall, signings of the day. What do you think?
I thought Gus Edwards probably was the most unsurprising signing of any one of those three. In reality, we've been talking about Gus Edwards, given the Ortiz and Harbaugh connection. It just made a lot of sense for them. If you played against Gus Edwards, whether you were in the NFL or if it was fantasy football, you knew what type of a touchdown demon he was and how much he would rob you of those moments when it got down to the goal line. And given his age and on a 2-year deal and the numbers that came in for that, I thought this was a great value signing, Dan, especially in a day where I have to admit I was wrong about the running back class for this year. I thought that in terms of the performances from said running backs from last year. We knew the type of bad value market that it was last year. I honestly thought it was going to be a little bit worse. And boy, was I wrong, because the running backs ran the show today. The running backs absolutely ran the show today. And you start seeing some of the contracts that were given out. First of all, good for them, because they deserve those type of numbers in that market. But second of all, to see all those numbers, the Saquon Barkleys, and all the other ones, and then you get to Gus Edwards, and it's a 2-year deal, just under $7 million, and you're just like, oh my God, like this is the type of value picks the Chargers needed given their current salary cap situation. And it's a running back that's going to fit well into Jim Harbaugh's system, what he wants. You get that type of bruising back. And I've said it from the time Jim Harbaugh became the head coach, that I felt that this strategy with this running back room, given the fact that there's so many question marks, you need to sign one and you need to draft one. So I don't think the Chargers are done yet as it relates to loading out and rounding out this running back stable that they have. Will Dissly, Dan, it's a blocking end that the Chargers have not had that type of caliber on in a long time. Maybe the closest would be Steven Anderson, and it's probably still not even as good as Dissly in that regard, but that was the last probably closest tight end that you had in terms of blocking goes. I thought that was a very nice signing in terms of what Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz said they wanted to do from the jump in terms of getting more physical, getting the run game going, getting that run blocking better, which it definitely suffered last year in a multitude of different facets for the Chargers. And here we go, right from the jump. There's 2 moves right there that are immediately going to upgrade that. And then, of course, Alohi Gilman. Of all the Chargers free agents that are out there for this year, I believe it was 27, including Gilman. Gilman was the one that made the most sense to bring back. I would not be surprised if he's the only one that the Chargers end up bringing back, to be perfectly honest. I thought his play that he has put out over the last year and a half has definitely deserved that second contract. I think the dynamic between him and Derwin in terms of what you can do with him, just the way that Alohi Gilman plays, aggressive, is a willing tackler. You see what he does when it comes to the forced fumbles, how physical he plays. I thought it was a very, very well-deserved second contract for Alohi Gilman. So I'm glad to see, especially in a secondary where you're going to need to reload a lot of positions, that you have some stability there, especially at the safety position.
Yes. Young West with a $2 donation. Donations always rise to the top before we get to all the other comments, which we'll do here in a second. Will Dissly snuck under my radar. Top 3 run blocker for sure. Jake, let's get into Will Dissly here for a second. Let's start off with the tight end, the run blocker. You mentioned him. It's on a 3-year deal, $14 million is the highest he can go. Young West, thank you so much for the donation. Some of the numbers on this tight end that the Chargers brought in are kind of mind-blowing. And I'm going to read some of these off to you. Will Dissly, we've talked ad nauseum about how god-awful the blocking has been for this Chargers team, specifically from the tight ends and running backs. Jake and I have talked about this all season. I know a lot of people want to pile on the offensive line and Trey Pipkins and all that kind of stuff. In my eyes, it's not even close. The tight end and running back room was worse in pass protection and run blocking. Jake, Will Dissly, second among all tight ends in the NFL last year. All tight ends in run blocking. Third among all tight ends in pass blocking. The craziest part, 13th in the entire NFL in pass blocking grade last year. The entire NFL, that's tackles, guards, centers, and tight ends and running backs, 13th is now your Los Angeles Chargers tight end. Is he going to be the guy that, stretches the field? No. But he's going to be the guy that helps you win games. He's going to be the guy that can protect the blind side, can protect a run game. This was massive. And you heard people all over the country clamoring for the Chargers to finally get a tight end that could block. And we asked for it last year. The year before, it never happened. They had a bunch of guys that were catching and tried to block, but they were terrible. And Jake, you and I have gone through the numbers this past year. Awful blocking from the tight ends and running backs this year. so underrated. Some people might look at it and say, wow, $14 million for a run blocker, for a pass blocker. Yeah, honestly, yes. And Jake, you and I also talked about the idea of you can fix the run game, you can fix the pass game, you can fix the blocking in many ways. You can get a better right tackle, you can get a better guard, whatever. You can also help with scheme, coaching, positional coaching, and tertiary stuff, helping with chipping, blocking. The Will Dissly one, man, that one got me equally hyped to Gus Edwards, which we'll talk in a second. But whew, it has been a minute since we've had a blocking tight end, an effective blocking tight end. Yeah. Anyone, and Thomas Costello comes in here and says, can't deny Dissly. He's a protector and Justin will like him. Can't say it better myself. If you are going to protect Justin Herbert, how can you be upset?
The amazing part about it is, Dan, you alluded to how bad the tight end blocking was last year. And that's been obviously well documented. The Chargers have needed a blocking tight end for years. We all expected that. They were going to prioritize that in last year's draft. They chose not to do that. And the results kind of spoke for themselves in that regard. But Dan, just think about this. If you need someone to chip, you may actually have someone to do it now. Believe it or not. It's like the Chargers, I'm sure, brought guys in to chip those edge rushers last year. But you wouldn't be able to tell based on how the play ended up being executed. It was just insane how bad the tight end blocking was last year. And to get a guy with these type of numbers in a priority that your head coach said he wanted to do, that is going to, in two ways, help protect the quarterback, get this run game going, open better holes for it in that regard. This is a great value signing for the Chargers.
Yes. Matt Waters with the $5 donation. Thank you so much. After this one, Jake, let's do a couple rapid fire Q&A here so we can get through some of these, or else we're going to drown in questions. Matt Waters says, if I was to write a short story about the first day of this new era, it would include a big back, a blocking tight end, and Alohi. Coincidence? I'd say he'd had the answers to the test, but yes, definitely coincidence. I would say, honestly, if you think about it, what were the three things that the Chargers were terrible at last year that had to get fixed? The tight end, or roster-wise, the tight end group, pass blocking, run blocking, downright atrocious. Fix that. At least fix part of that. Again, Donald Parham, Stone Smart, the only guys in a contract right now. The running game was figuratively and almost literally always non-existent. And we'll get to Gus Edwards here in a second and how that fixes things, especially when you needed a yard or two. Check with Gus Edwards, which we'll talk about. And then the secondary was absolutely abysmal. And one of, if not the only steady face of that secondary last year was Alohi Gilman. And Alohi Gilman, quietly or loudly, depending on who you are, had one of the top seasons among all safeties in the NFL last year. So yeah, short story, I think, was written pretty well. Let's see. I saw something in here about Mike Williams rumors. Let's get back to this. I saw a comment about Matt Dahl comes in and says, so the Lightning Round podcast, shout out Lightning Round, rumors that the Patriots are trying to trade for Mike Williams. Jake, are your 10 fingers and toes crossed like mine are, hoping it happens?
The only thing that I've seen out there was that the Patriots were going to be heavily pursuing a wide receiver in free agency. Now, what type of merit is that? Who it is specifically that they're targeting? No idea. As it relates to Mike Williams, and this is going to obviously coincide with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack here within the next 24 to 36 hours as we get closer to Wednesday especially. I don't think that anybody believes that Mike Williams has much trade value right now. I only say that not from the standpoint of what he can do, but I think the rest of the league already anticipates that because of the cap situation that the Chargers are currently in, that they're going to just flat out release him. So why would they try to give any draft capital? And you might actually fall into the same realm with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa in that regard. With these moves that the Chargers did today, I would expect that you don't see any outside moves before Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa situations are figured out. I think that is what's going to make the headlines for tomorrow in Chargers land, is that we're going to hear the news on whether it's a release, whether it's a trade that's already been negotiated and set up. One way or another, I think this is what the priority is going to be for tomorrow, because now the Chargers are, with these three moves, Dan, they're right around the 30 million mark over the cap. Do they still need to get under?
Just did those three, it'd be like 30, about 30 million.
Yeah. So this is where you need to obviously now focus your attention on, because you need to be cap compliant. You need to get there. So
I think it was 36, if I remember right. I think it was 36.
Okay. So before any other outside free agent moves happen, the decision on these three players will take place first.
Yes, Cody says if we get a seventh for Mike, sweet. Honestly, any pick. I mean, you can be greedy and say you want a fifth or a fourth or whatever, but like you want something. So you hope to see it. There are people saying trade Williams for a fourth or a fifth. That'd be wonderful. Would you rather have Mike Williams or T. Higgins?
I mean, you probably would just say T. Higgins right now, just based off of availability. I think you can do more with T. Higgins personally. I know that Mike is fantastic when it comes to the 50-50 jump ball. He's one of the best when it comes to that. And I think even over the last couple of years, this Chargers offense had actually understood how to utilize him better than just being a straight deep threat. But I think when you just look at the standpoint of availability, yeah, I would probably give T. Higgins the edge in that argument.
I think I'll give T. Higgins the argument for availability. I kind of lean towards Mike just from like a familiarity perspective, but like this is a new regime. And while he's familiar with Justin Herbert and while there's a connection there, like I think they just need to kind of hit the reset button a little bit there. Chargers go in the running back pool. And you see names like Saquon Barkley go for buku bucks, and Josh Jacobs go for buku bucks, and DeAndre Swift get paid. Austin Ekeler is now a Washington Commander. You're seeing a lot of these running backs go, and then the Chargers kind of just sitting back waiting. And this, of course, this was prior to Austin Ekeler getting signed by Washington. But news breaks. Ravens running back Gus Edwards signs with the Chargers. 2-year, just $6.5 million. Again, just put in context, I think it's like $13.4 million for Gus Edwards, Alohi Gilman, and Will Dissly. All three of those guys. That's about the same as what Saquon and Josh Jacobs are getting. You got three starting players for the price of one running back that you could have gone out and gotten. So, smart move. Gus Edwards, I saw a stat here from Next Gen Stats. With reuniting with Greg Roman, he averaged plus 0.7 rushing yards over expected per carry from 2019 to 2022. Fourth highest among all running backs over that span with a minimum of 300 carries. Only Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor and Tuli Pollard have better numbers than Gus Edwards. And how often did we freaking see the Chargers running backs or the Chargers coaching staff dial up a play call for a 3rd and 1, 1st and 10, 4th and inches, and it went nowhere. It was painful, nailed on a chalkboard cringe every time, which is why we saw Justin Herbert get blasted. Gus Edwards is like the antithesis of that. We finally have a bruising running back. Finally. And actually, he's a pretty good blocker relative to what the Chargers have seen, especially this last year. I think he ranks somewhere in like the yellow range, according to PFF. Austin Ekeler was like bright red last year, along with everyone else that was in the running back squad. So the Gus Edwards one, again, familiarity with the Ravens offense, with Greg Roman, with John Harbaugh, you name it. Gus Edwards now joins the Chargers, 2 years, $6.5 million. Jake, thoughts?
Dan, what I think about this, and this is just kind of me just following the tea leaves here, I think there's a very good chance that Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, their plan is essentially to make the Chargers running back stable, much like it was in Baltimore. I mean, remember how much of a running back committee that team was? I mean, you had J.K. Dobbins, you had Gus Edwards at the time, you had Keaton Mitchell, you had Justice Hill, you even got Dalvin Cook at one point in time. With as aggressive as they want to fix the run game, because I've seen some people in here in the comments talk about, well, what about Isaiah Spiller? Or what about Elijah Dotson? True, but at this point in time, we still do not know what they are. Those are two guys that you cannot say to pencil in as running back 2 today. Not at all. So this is why I still believe.
Who's running back 1 right now?
I mean, it's probably Gus Edwards right now, but this does not sway you from drafting a running back on. I think your priority comes down a little bit from where it was, just 2 short days ago. So you probably will say, okay, we'll go out and we'll get another day 3 running back from this interesting crop of guys with, different sizes, different skill sets for what they bring to the table. But I think that is what their plan is, because obviously with Gus Edwards, as much as we enjoy about this, it's still a short-term deal. Still a short-term deal for this. He's 28 years old. He'll be 30 at the time that this contract is up. And what is your running back room going to look for the future? If Isaiah Spiller was given more snaps last year, maybe we would have a better idea of that. But unfortunately, we don't. So I think that the Chargers could go 3 heavy, 4 heavy at running back and really just try to create a very multifaceted stable of running backs that they're just going to continue to recycle throughout the game and keep guys fresh.
James Wagner, considering we have a Gus Edwards, Spiller, and Dotson along with a top-rated run-blocking tight end, a coaching system that succeeds at the run game, we're not looking bad at all. What say you? Jake, do you think... Let me rephrase. What type, or if there are a couple prospects that you think, given that trio, would fit as like a complement to those in the draft? Like, in my mind, I kind of think like, all right, like Will Shipley type. He's like the shifty one. Blake Corum, I think, is another one. Kind of like the shifty scat back one. You have the bruiser now. We don't know much about Elijah Dotson, although he's kind of like that type, I guess. In theory, Isaiah Spiller is similar-ish to Gus Edwards, kind of one cut go, one gap go. Who would be like a couple running back guys?
I mean, I can't disagree with what Jordan said on our show last week in terms of his favorite in Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin. I think if you added him to this running back stable, it would just be insane.
A lot of girth.
But I mean, it'll be interesting because, Jonathan Brooks is a guy who you don't know where he's actually going to fall given his injury history. I really like Ray Davis out of Kentucky. Pardon me. I've been a very big Isaiah Davis fan out of South Dakota State, but I think that his mold is a little bit like Gus Edwards now, even though I know that Isaiah Davis has a stiff arm that would make Derrick Henry very, very happy in watching that. But you probably would go with you'd probably try to mix it up. You probably wouldn't want, every one of the guys with the same type of skill sets. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd out of USC, it would make just a bunch of sense given the fact of who the coaching staff is there now. But it'll be an interesting dynamic because even if you think about it, let's just say you drafted one of these guys that has a very similar skill set, you don't know how long Isaiah Spiller is going to be on this team. It might not be long. So you're going to have to recycle that skill set anyways. So personally, I wouldn't take any running back off the table right now. I'd say that they're still all in play, but you probably come back off of your priority a little bit now at running back, not as high as it originally may have been. And you probably are solidified now in day 3, starting in the 4th round at the very least, to target one of these guys, given the other priorities that you have on your team.
We are live. Chargers Unleashed, live edition. Always love these. Next question. Again, if you guys have questions, comments, thoughts, put them in the chat. We'll try to go through. And also, if you haven't already done so, please hit that like and subscribe. But Jake, before we do any of this, we'll transition into the big 4, because there's a question here from Xavier, and there's a couple that we saw here related to this. Pay the bills, talk about our friends.
Want to tell everybody about the easiest way to get into the sports action. It's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite players, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Just pick between 2 and 5 players, fill out your pick'em entry, get every pick right, and take home some cold, hard cash. Use the promo code UNLEASHED and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Go on over to Underdog Fantasy today and let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you.
So, the gigantic elephant, woolly mammoth, if you will, of this conversation in the room
Yes,
is
yes, and yes.
what and when we will hear about the quote-unquote Big Four. And like, this is going to be something, and I tweeted last night, like, I'm bracing for it. I'm bracing for impact because this is going to be an uncomfortable next few days. I don't know exactly when. I don't know exactly who. But I don't know them definitively. But I would honestly be shocked if it's not Mack, Bosa, and Williams no longer on this team when it's all said and done. I think all three are gone. I do. And the folks that say there's no way they're trading Keenan, I don't think that's true. I think if a team calls with the right package, I think he's gone too. That's not because he's not a good player. It's not because these guys are not good or because Khalil Mack doesn't have any juice left. It's simple economics. And when you have a new regime with proven success and a proven track record, how quickly do they want to turn this into the roster that they envision? And right now, this is, Jake, you and I talked about it. They can rip that Band-Aid right now, and it'll be painful right now. But the new era, the dawn of the era, begins now versus kind of kicking the can. So when Xavier asks, how long until we hear? I think we hear in the next 24 hours. I mean, we have to hear by the start of the new year, which is Wednesday. So, like, clock's ticking. But I think the three that we have here are not going to be Chargers. If it was me, that would be my choice.
Yeah, I would agree. And whether this is by straight out release or there's one trade in this trio, I know everybody freaked out over the weekend when the reports started coming out that the Chargers were exhausting calls basically on every one of the big four that included Keenan Allen in that circumstance. Now, look, realistically, I don't think that there is going to be a team that's going to pony up to the value that the Chargers would want to get in return for Keenan Allen, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But to Dan's point, I don't think it's unwise to possibly put that off the table. Look, if you look at all the big four, every single one of them, even if you kept all four of them, are probably only going to remain with the team for 1 year. So you're eventually going to move off of them anyways. And if they're at a value that you can try to get at the highest point right now, you try to get that there. Otherwise, you're going to have to eat the cap and you'll make a release and you'll get underneath the salary cap and you can make your moves from there. And hopefully you'll end up acquiring a comp pick in the process. But in this particular circumstance, I personally believe that Keenan Allen is safe. I don't think that a team is going to come in with a compensation package that the Chargers would possibly entertain. I think that Mike Williams has trade value, but the rest of the league doesn't believe that, given that they already know what the Chargers situation is. So I think they know that they're going to release him, which is what I think that they're waiting for. Khalil Mack, I honestly think, has the most trade value. And the only difference between that and Bosa, because yes, Bosa is about roughly 4 to 5 years younger than Mack is. He's got the age advantage, but now it's 2 years in a row that he's been injured. And to take on that contract, what could you possibly get back from? Dan and I had gone through an episode where there was hypothetical trades that were put out there that the Lions could be a target for both Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, and maybe you roughly get a 4th-round pick back for either one of them. That was a hypothetical trade that was put out from PFF at that time. Unfortunately, I was actually really upset to see that. Who was it? It was Marcus Davenport.
Right.
Ended up signing a 1-year deal with the Lions, so that takes out their need because they've been looking for pass rushing help opposite of Aiden O'Connell. So that's one possible trade partner that's probably off the books now. They also traded another one of their 3rd-round picks for a cornerback, so that's now more draft capital that they've let go. So who's possibly going to pony up? Obviously, you'd have to think that anybody that's in that contenders bracket that's willing to go. We obviously have all heard about the possibility of Joey Bosa going to play to San Francisco with his brother, Nick. That could happen via, I don't know if that happens via trade. It's probably definitely going to happen if he ends up getting released, most likely.
They just got 2 edge players today. Like even
they got 2 edge players. But San Francisco, they like stockpiling their defensive line, and they just got a crap ton of compensation picks. So they have draft capital to spare in that circumstance. So it'll be interesting to see how this ends up playing out. But to Dan's original point, I think by the time that we get to Wednesday, these 3 players, unfortunately, will no longer be on this team.
And again, like this is just pure economics of roster building. And I think this is something that oftentimes Chargers fans overlook, and it's easy to overlook this, but like at the end of the day, you have to be responsible about how you build a roster, and there are certain ways that are just simply unsustainable. And if you think about it right now, and I tweeted this out earlier, but if you think about it right now, you got those big 4 contracts: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. That's 4. Add on top of that, the mega Justin Herbert contract. That's 5. Add on top of that, Derwin James contract. That's now kicking in big time. That's 6. Rashawn Slater very well could reset his contract with an extension. That's 7. You cannot have 7 blue chip, top tier salaries, let alone players, but just salaries. That is unsustainable. You cannot do that. And what we've seen, how that affects this Chargers team or any team, is, again, the underbelly of the roster. When you're spending that much money, when you have that much of a percentage accounted for by just 6 or 7 players, you're basically left to draft picks and veteran minimums for the rest. And we know this firsthand. The Chargers team has simply not been set up to succeed or to sustain a 18-week season. You see injuries that inevitably happen. Now, I will say they probably have happened more so to the Chargers, but like, whatever. When your depth is non-existent, this is why you get in these situations. And you got to do it. It's pure economics. And personally, I'd rather have 3 or 4 blue chip top tier contracts aligned to top tier players performing up to their contract, key there, and then the rest of them B, C, D in terms of tiered salary numbers that brings together a roster. You just are providing so much risk if you're top heavy like this. And so while it will hurt, I think this is kind of the cleanse that this roster needs. Even with the gut punch. It's a gut punch for Chargers fans. But if you're looking purely business and roster construction and management, and you're new to this organization, I think it's an easy choice. I think you have to. Anything, Jake, that I said that like is not fair? It sucks, but I've like totally accepted this now.
It makes sense because you had a front office that decided to make these moves in a all-in situation going into last year. And unfortunately, you couple that with the bad free agent signings that just didn't end up producing value for you. And I'm talking about the J.C. Jacksons. I'm talking about the Austin Johnsons. I'm talking about the Sebastian Joseph Days of the world. They didn't end up, unfortunately, fulfilling the contracts that they were signing to. And we obviously all saw what ended up coming of that. So it was bad financial move after bad financial move after bad financial move. And at some point, you need to get out from underneath this hole that the previous regime put you under. Hence moves like these. But as Joe Ortiz likes to say, he loves those comp picks. So it's one way or another that the Chargers should be getting something in return.
Yeah. And then the other contract, you talked about Gus Edwards, talked about Will Dissly. We talked briefly about Alohi Gilman. 2 years, $11 million for Alohi Gilman. A lot of people were talking about the possibility of him getting sub 3. But then you started hearing rumblings that at the combine, Alohi Gilman's name was brought up a lot. And you're starting to hear about the value that he brings and the glue that he provided to this Chargers team when there was not many glue pieces other than probably him and Khalil Mack on this entire defensive roster. $5.5 million a year on average for a starting safety is pretty darn good for a proven starting safety and a homegrown talent. I think that was one that a lot of Chargers fans were very excited about. Alohi Gilman stays in the Powder Blues. You saw him with his Instagram reel, I think it was. He was vibing for sure. Jake, would you rather have had Alohi Gilman or take your pick of safety in the draft?
It was an interesting safety draft. And I think if the Chargers didn't have so many holes, maybe you could have prioritized that because you don't know what you have still with JT Woods back there. You needed to fill something there with consistency and obviously try to make that decision on who you're going to pair Derwin James with for the next couple of years. And Alohi made this was the easiest decision to make. And I'm so glad that they ended up doing this because like I said in the opener, Alohi Gilman has earned and deserved this second contract for him. And to have somebody that plays the way he does, I think Alohi just always seems to play like, he is the underdog. And being a former 6th-round pick, I think he's still out to prove something. And you got to love how aggressive he is. You have to love how physical he is. When it comes to turning the ball over, he just seems to be around that a lot. Laying a big hit, he seems to do that. He laid plenty of those last year. And it's just a great story from his standpoint to see this. So, couple Alohi situation with some of the big name safeties that you knew that the Chargers weren't going to be able to afford. And I guess you could call it the top heavy safety class, but even still, if the Chargers didn't have 9 other problems to worry about in the draft, maybe you could say, yeah, go out and get one of these safeties in this upcoming draft. But when would you have possibly prioritized that? Because your cornerback, essentially everywhere on your defense needs help. Safety was kind of the last one that you think about. I don't think that it was a higher priority than linebacker. It wasn't a higher priority than edge or interior defensive line. It definitely wasn't a higher priority than your cornerback room because you definitely need a few in that circumstance. So this was an easy decision to make. It's familiarity. It is good money for a good player, and I'm very happy for him for this second contract.
Yeah, I'm taking Alohi Gilman over safeties in this class. No question, especially in the immediate future. Like, I think he fits Jesse Minter's defense. I think he fits the characteristics that Jim Harbaugh likes in players. As a 6th-round pick to now be re-signed by your team and to be producing with the numbers that he's had, like that's impressive. And, I tweeted out, I think it was like a week or two ago, like it's insane to me that Alohi Gilman has ended up becoming like one of the top probably 5 or 6 players on this Chargers roster that has been drafted in the last like 6 years or 5 years, whatever it was. And, Alohi Gilman
in terms of like production.
Yes. In terms of like what they've turned into as players, it's incredible the number of players that they've drafted that have not. And Alohi Gilman clearly has far exceeded the 6th-round pick, the stigma that you get on a late day 3 guy. And he's been balling. Like you don't see 6th-round picks play as well as he has played this year. And so testament to him to kind of climb from that 6th-round moniker to now becoming just a stud football player. And now to see him kind of stay and actually get a nice significant pay raise too. Like $5.5 million is like close to double what people thought that he's going to be getting in this free agency market. So hats off to him. Love to see the Flying Hawaiian back out here for the 2 years. I know he's a fan favorite. Alohi crew stand up, and a bunch of people are excited about it, myself included. Just brings some level of assuredness, some level of like safety valve where at least you've got Derwin and Alohi together that have played there that can kind of help when this new regime kind of takes over on defense. We are live. Please, questions, topics. We'll get into some possible free agents that are still available for day 2, 3+ as we continue forward. We'll also get into maybe some draft stuff. But overall, folks in the chat, what are your thoughts on today? What are you looking for moving forward? What would you like us to see from this team? And how do we think this affects the draft? Jake's favorite time of year. So why don't we do that first? Jake, Chargers now have their running back, or at least a running back. Step 1 of 2 for running back situation. They have a blocking tight end. They also have their safety. So that's essentially 3 draft picks that don't have to be selected on those 3 specific things. Cool. And they did it at a cost that was pretty controlled. And I think I would say responsible.
Very much
Does
so.
this mean Brock Bowers is no longer in play?
I don't think entirely that's the case because, and I say that, and I'm not saying it as to say, okay, that the Chargers are going to take him at 5 or anything like that. But again, you look at the rest of this tight end room, Donald Parham, Stone Smart. As much as I like Donald Parham, has he shown anything of the capabilities of being your number 1 passing tight end option? Can he do it? Sure. Is he an athletic freak for his size? Yes, he is. But A, how often is he out there? B, he's not really been put in that type of a role yet, and that was due to a lot of things, not based off of his play, but previous regimes that just didn't run too many tight end sets, but that was also because they couldn't block. So, yes, you get Dissly added to this group. Who's going to be your tight end 1? That's going to be your pass catching option. Does this mean you bring Gerald Everett back? No, I don't think you sign 2 tight ends in free agency. I don't think that you do that. And this tight end class is, as we know, interesting. It's not the strongest tight end class. Beyond Brock Bowers, Gap, then Jatavian Sanders, who's the athletic pass catcher of the rest of that group? So I wouldn't say that it's completely off the board. And again, let's remember, Jim Harbaugh, once upon a time before Brock Bowers ended up in Georgia, heavily recruited Brock Bowers to Michigan. And that didn't end up playing out. It'd be an interesting world if it ended up playing out, if it would have ended up playing out that way. But I could totally see a trade down scenario, and if Brock Bowers happens to be there at 9, 11, whatever it ends up being, I could totally see the Chargers taking Brock Bowers in that circumstance.
So let's go a little around the horn for NFL stuff. So Sean O'Brien comments, Kirk Cousins is a Falcon, which, by the way, Kirk Cousins, like savage negotiator. Props to him. Should we trade down with Minnesota? A bunch of people are talking about possibly trading down. Yes, you should be trading down with Minnesota. We'll take 2 to tango, obviously. Challenge is Minnesota doesn't have a second-round pick, so maybe you can get next year's first. But are you okay with not getting a second-round pick this year? We're not getting another second-round pick this year to get out of your first at 5? Do you get a couple 3s? Next year's 1? Like, you doing it?
Honestly, if in any trade down scenario for the Chargers, I don't think that anybody should be upset. Number 1, they haven't traded down in the draft in 10 years. So if a trade happens, even if it's back 1 spot, I don't care. At this point, I've been begging for the Chargers to trade down in the draft for years. So I really don't care what the compensation is back. I'll just be happy they get it. There's enough holes that you have to fill on this roster that right now you just need more draft capital to do so. And it sounds like you have a good front office that knows the team and the camaraderie with the coaches as well, and the corroboration to know the team that they want to build. That's the other key part of it. So Yes, you trade down. In Dan's perfect world, the Danny special, as he calls it, the Chargers trade back twice in the first round.
That would hit. That would hit so well. I would just sit back and probably cry tears of joy for sure. There's a question in here about Sandersill. Do you think the Chargers should go get Mike Sandersill, Michigan corner, slot corner extraordinaire?
I would love to see Sandersill in this defense. Reunite him with Jesse Minter, with Harbaugh. I still have the over-under line for Michigan players that are drafted by the Chargers at 1.5. I think that they end up with 2 Michigan players by the time that the draft is all said and done. And I say that because I know that everybody immediately, basically puts him in that slot cornerback scenario. But what have you seen enough from Jasir Taylor that could tell you otherwise?
As a starter?
I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't say that his position's solidified. Not at all. So you get someone who's now familiar with the defensive coordinator and the head coach, and his play has obviously spoken for itself. Yes.
Young West asks, what position do you think we go after in free agency moving forward? Mr. Jake Hefner. We were prepared for this one. Position-wise first. They did tight end, did running back, got safety. Everyone we see in the chat is still wondering who's snapping the ball to Justin Herbert, because certainly, clearly, currently, nobody is. We don't know what's going on with Mack or Bosa. Maybe both are gone. You're going to have 36 million minus the 20-ish that they're down. So we're going to have roughly like 17 million or so to spend. Ish. I would probably guess linebacker, maybe. Edge, possibly. Value. I think they have Josh Uche as like a name that surprisingly isn't expected to get paid as much as I thought he would have. And then clearly center, although you saw centers go off the board real quick today. Coleman Shelton's a name to look for.
Yeah, the Titans reset the market essentially on the center position today with the deal for Lloyd Cushenberry. But Coleman Shelton's a name. Bradley Bozeman makes a lot of sense just because of where he was originally drafted at Baltimore. So here you go back with the Ortiz ties. 29 years old for Bozeman. I think if you gave him a, short-term 3-year deal, I think that could be a nice Band-Aid for moving forward. And you can continue to still build out this offensive line. So if they were going to go for a free agent center and, bypass the draft in that regard, those are 2 names that I could think of. Josh Uche is going to be interesting because this will all really depend on where the Chargers at financially in the next day or so. Josh Uche obviously has Michigan ties to Jim Harbaugh and still only 25 years old. I'd be interested to see what contract that they would give him in that circumstance. And that would essentially be your young edge duo of the future if you were to pair Josh Uche and Tuli with one another. I wouldn't be mad at it. I would like it. I still think that the Band-Aid needs to be ripped off as it relates to the edge position with Bosa and Mack personally. And you need to start creating this new edge group moving forward over the next 5 years. And the linebacker class, Dan, is just... The reason I say it's interesting is because there's a lot of players that if you want to target the young ones, the Chargers can't afford it. But anybody else that's on that mark, you're getting into the age territory where I feel like they just went away from that with Eric Kendricks. And I think now, because there's so many question marks at the linebacker position, I don't expect Kenneth Murray to be re-signed to this team. So you have Daiyan Henley, you have Nick Neiman, essentially that's on your roster right now. How are you going to fill this out? This linebacker class in general is not the strongest. So what do? If it were me, I would say my priority is to get younger at that position. We know how athletic Daiyan Henley is, but unfortunately he hasn't had enough snaps on this roster outside of special teams to show anything like that. So linebacker is going to be a very, very interesting situation moving forward.
Had a couple fans in here ask about the Ekeler situation. For those who do not know, Ekeler signed with the Washington Commanders. Apparently, there's a Jets fan in here asking what our thoughts are on losing Austin Ekeler. I'm very grateful for Austin Ekeler's contributions to this team. He was a fan favorite for a very long time. As the years went on, in short, he vastly outperformed his contract. And the Chargers were very lucky, for the most part, about the production that he was able to provide and the spark that he provided to them. Now, that being said, there were things that, and maybe some of it wasn't his fault, some of it maybe had not been in his control, but there's a reason the Chargers are looking for running backs still. And Austin Ekeler himself had said that he was always looking for kind of a partner to take that RB1 spot or to share that running back position with. And it just never happened. And this Chargers team simply could not run. And so whether it's injury, whether it's blocking, whether it's age, and whether it's he's just not that kind of player, he got a lot of touchdowns. Well, prior to this past year, he's a touchdown machine, fantasy football, shout out. But in terms of championship football, getting first downs, churning the clock, that wasn't him. And it severely impacted this team's ability to win games at the end. And you can go back, there's a bunch of games, but go watch that Jacksonville playoff game and show me how much they ran in that second half. And go watch the last few seasons and tell me what the running games look like, because oof. So as an offensive weapon, yeah, Austin Ekeler was pretty good. But you can't have offensive weapons if you don't have a running game. You have to have one. So those are my thoughts. Great player for the Chargers. Appreciated by the fans for a long time. Did a bunch for this team production-wise, but as a runner, left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I don't disagree in that circumstance. I think it was time for both parties to split. I'm grateful for Ekeler from the standpoint of contractually what he got, because you look at the last contract that he played over on the Chargers, it essentially was a bargain compared to the rest of the market when it was a 4-year, $24 million contract. You could say that he easily outplayed that within year 2 and 3 of that contract. Now, as to Dan's point, when it came for what the Chargers needed, based on what you weren't getting in the passing game, what you weren't getting from the pass blocking game, what you needed from that running back stable, and unfortunately, Austin Ekeler was not alone in not assisting and contributing to that in terms of run blocking, pass blocking, or just being able to gain any positive yardage out of the running game in general, because the Chargers' running game last year was absolutely atrocious. It made the most sense for the Chargers to part ways with Austin in this circumstance. It was time. He got a contract. Now he heads east. Contract that I felt like, from his standpoint, I think is fair market value based on the rest of what everybody else has gotten. So you wish Austin well. As Dan's point, he was a fan favorite for a long time. There's no ill will that anybody should have towards Austin Ekeler at this point. This is a new regime. It's a new day. And this is the retooling and rebuilding, if you will, of the Chargers that just needed to happen.
Yeah. Wish him well, honestly. I hope he balls out in Washington. Great dude on and off the field. Shout out to Oscar for the $1.99 donation. Appreciate you. A lot of people in here talking about trading Keenan Allen or Mike Williams or Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. And look, the simple reality is the Chargers have to be compliant by the start of the new year, which is Wednesday. I think it's 1 o'clock Eastern. So I think it's like 10 Pacific or something like that. And they currently aren't. And so as much as everyone wants to say, oh, we can just trade all these, you got to find someone who is willing to trade, knowing that if they don't and no one else does, you're going to release them anyways. Because you have to. Now, sure, like they could restructure some and they can slightly get in there before the deadline where they're like, within a couple dollars of being compliant. But realistically, do we really think that that's the best decision for this Chargers team? I was doing some quick, just playing around, and I got to go find it, but I think Spot Track has a calculator where you can go in and kind of check out the salary cap. And if you cut, release, trade, whatever, you can see what the cap situation looks like. Right now, the Chargers are, before all this stuff happened with the signings today, 21 and change million over the cap. Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and Mike Williams. If you take those three, and whether you trade or cut for compensation, whatever it is, those three go from 21 million over the cap to 36.5 under the cap. Then let's say you look at guys like Morgan Fox, that brings you up to 40 million. Let's say they decide to restructure Keenan Allen's contract and he stays. They can probably get up to 50 plus million under the cap. And as much as it would suck to not get any compensation for those guys, they might not have a choice because time's running out. And unfortunately, other NFL teams know that. And so what is the pull for other teams to trade, let alone trade high capital?
That's it.
When they know the Chargers are kind of in a stuck between a rock and a hard place right now.
Again, it's tough when you do what the Chargers did last year with those 4 restructures of the contract. If Khalil Mack was 25 instead of 33 years old, this would be a lot easier of a chess piece to move, even with the contract, personally. You take those stats from last year, if you were to equate that in, say, a 25 or between a 25 and a 28-year-old player, you would probably have a much more feistier trade market that'd be willing to part ways with higher draft capital. Unfortunately, you don't, because any team that obviously ends up taking on Mack or Bosa's contract knows that that's going to have to end up being restructured. It may only end up being a 1-year deal for whoever gets Mack in that circumstance, because how many more years do you expect to have him put up production like he did last year for the Chargers? The chances are probably not the best. So this is what the other teams are weighing, as opposed to, do I give up any draft capital at all? Or do I just wait for them to be squeezed financially and I'll sign him to the contract that I believe is going to fit well within our system?
Thomas Costello says, those decisions are probably made, I would say. I think I agree. I think right now it's just a matter of timing. You know, whether there are specific numbers or, you know, if a last minute trade or something happens, but I think the understanding that regardless of what comes to be, those however many players or whatever, whoever they are no longer going to be a part of this team. I think it's just a matter of, you know, finalization, if you will. Let's hand this over to the Chargers fans. Jake's taken out for a hot second here. I think he has some technical difficulties. In the chat, what are your thoughts? What are you looking for moving forward for this Chargers team? How do you see this impacting this free agency moving forward? What do you think they're going to do next? In the meantime, I'll continue with these questions. Luke Edwards asks, do you think we cut any of them and offer them contracts again for lower prices? No, I do not. The only ones I could see possibly, or that I think that they should possibly restructure, would be Keenan Allen, possibly Khalil Mack. Although, like, Khalil Mack is probably, I would think, will get traded. But that's a lot of money for Khalil Mack right now. And so, yeah, you can structure him. You could probably save another $10+ million if you add another year to it. I don't know if that's the best thing for this roster moving forward long term. But I don't know. I don't think they're going to sign again for lower prices. Jesse asks, what about Kenneth Murray? I can't even find out if he's a free agent or not. Yes, he is a free agent. Whoa, Jake. Look at you. On the 7th day, he said, "Let there be light." Looking fresh, my friend.
It's this daylight saving times thing. It's just like I felt like we were recording at 4, and then all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, hey, the sun's dropping finally. Okay, had to improvise.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Kenneth Murray is a free agent, as is Patrick Queen, by the way. Jake, percentage chance that Kenneth Murray gets re-signed. Now, this might be an answer that people might not expect because this is a new regime, and think about the types of players that this defense and Jesse Minter and stuff have had. But Jake, is Kenneth Murray a Charger next year?
I'll give it a 8% chance. 8.
Yeah. Gabriel says 0%, hopefully. Josh Uche, Jake, a name that we talked about earlier. Do you see them going edge in free agency? And if so, how much would you be willing to shell out for an edge player, considering you've got 2 already here that you're about to get rid of in theory?
Yeah, I mean, much like in the same circumstances, people have said, like, okay, if you get rid of Mike Williams, go out and sign one of these other big priced free agent wide receivers. It's like you already got enough money wrapped up in that. So to me, it wouldn't make the most sense that you get rid of 2 edge players with huge price tags to then go right back around and sign one with a huge price tag. Now, Josh Uche, as it relates to his possible market, was projected by Spot Track to be somewhere around $8.5 million. Dan and I personally believe that that's actually too low. I think that he's going to get into double digits easily. He has the age factor, only 25 years old. I think that somebody will pony up to give him a double-digit contract for sure.
What are your thoughts on a backup quarterback being signed in free agency? A few went off the board today. I think I saw rumors of possible Easton Stick. I forget where it says he was going.
To Philly, to reunite with Kellen Moore.
They're probably going to have a backup at minimum, as like a practice squad guy. I mean, if they do, they're not spending a lot of money on it. Promise you that. I would say near the minimum, but most likely would probably be a draft, I would think. Jake, agree?
Hopefully this time, if the Chargers end up drafting a quarterback, number one, you can't say that you're putting it anywhere between rounds 1 and 5. But let's just hope that even if you do end up drafting a quarterback at any point of the draft, that he ends up making it to training camp or out of training camp this time.
Let's see. All right. It looks like a lot of people want to talk draft stuff. So let's get into draft here for the next maybe 10, 15 minutes. Then we'll get out of here so people can enjoy their evening. Jake, favorite time of year? I think we're, 50 days, I believe, ish from the NFL draft?
Has to be less than that.
ZX
It better be less than that.
If we traded back to 15, Bowers and JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnston, for those who don't know, stud center, and both are on the board, who are you taking? 15.
This is not what I would do. No, let me take that back. It pains me to say this because it's a great comparison between 2 players. But if I was putting my Jim Harbaugh hat on, this is JPJ easily. If the Chargers don't go out and sign a free agent center, you take JPJ 100%. That is your anchor with Justin Herbert for the next 5 to 8 years, for however longer Justin Herbert's going to remain on this roster. That is your guy. That's essentially, Dan, think about this for a second. JPJ comes on this roster, and Nick Hardwick is partially responsible for coaching him up.
I literally got chills. That'd be so nice. Okay. Someone had here Arnold or Mitchell at 15. Terry and Arnold or AD Mitchell?
Quinyon.
Corner.
Wait, is this?
Oh.
Or
sorry.
Quinyon Mitchell.
Sorry.
Is this what it is?
Probably Terry Arnold or Quinny Mitchell. It's probably Quinny Mitchell. I'm sorry. Which corner?
I have been so high on Quinyon Mitchell since December. And unfortunately, as I have said previously, he has done everything to just absolutely obliterate the dreams of him ending up on the Chargers because he's done everything right. I still believe he has the best instincts out of any corner in this entire class. And what he did in college check. What he goes and does at the Senior Bowl, destroys. What he does at the Combine, explosion. Just everything that he's doing is just skyrocketing his draft stock. Dan, there is talks that there is a possibility that Quentin Mitchell could be the first cornerback taken. Now, I don't personally see that happening. I think Terrion Arnold has him beat in that circumstance just based on a number of different facets, but they're not that far apart, in my opinion. If it was me at 15, I think both guys, honestly, would fit into Jesse Minter's defense and what they want to do perfectly. But I probably would have to give the edge to Arnold just from the standpoint of he's got that it factor that you want out of cornerbacks, and you see it in his play, and you see how aggressive he is, and he's a willing tackler, and he's good in the run game. I'd have to give it to Arnold if he's still there at 15 between those two. It would pain me because I love Quentin Mitchell, but I'd have to give it to Terrion Arnold there.
I think I would as well. While we've been on, Jake, breaking news, Zach Moss looks to be signing with the Bengals. Justina Anderson lately has reported that she says, quote, "I'm told there's interest on both sides between the Ravens and running back Derrick Henry." Per source, an agreement still has not been reached, though. We'll see. Dude, the Ravens with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, like that's like a cheat code.
Wow.
Jeez. Jalen Reagor looks to be signing back with the Patriots. I think that was it for the latest in free agency news. Teams to trade down with. Falcons now have their quarterback, so I think that they 8 away. Although, possibly, they can now be in the hunt for a stud wide receiver. So maybe they trade up for that. Possibly. Minnesota definitely needs a quarterback right now. You saw the Steelers got Russell Wilson, so that kind of takes, in theory, them out of the equation. The Raiders got a new quarterback. I forget who's the quarterback again?
It's Gardner Minshew they went out and got. There was rumors floating around that they were going to be in the trade market for Justin Fields, and then all of a sudden it was Gardner Minshew signing for 2 years.
Luke Edwards in here says that Joe Mixon got released, which Joe Mixon is also the Aaron Jones from the Packers is released. Jake, any interest? I know that doesn't count against the comp stuff, comp formulas and all that, but would you go for Aaron Jones?
Not now. Not now. We just got done talking about what a great deal this was. Let's not go do something rash. I understand the appeal, but let's not do something rash.
I will say, like, it does feel nice to like know as a covering this Chargers team, like, all right, they got the quarterback. Like, look at the franchises. Like, look at what's going on with, and I don't feel sorry for New England Patriots fans because what they went through with Tom Brady, like they won enough. Like, enjoy this time without a quarterback. But like, you know, you go from Mac Jones and now the savior is Jacoby Brissett and you're hoping to get one in the draft. Like, okay, look at the Raiders right now or the last few years. You know, they have Derek Carr, which I know a lot of Chargers fans were kind of like, not that great. You go to Jimmy G, give him a boatload of money, and then he's benched by a rookie. He's not great. They bring in Gardner Minshew. I mean, that's tough. That's tough. And look, the Chargers, it's like, can we just freaking figure out a defense and figure out the line? Give them some weapons? Maybe a running game would be nice? And watch them cook? Please? Please?
Minnesota may be your best chance, though, Dan. Minnesota may be your best chance, though, because if you look at it, the Giants traded away their second round pick today when they acquired Brian Burns and signed him to a massive contract. I know some people are talking about it in here, which we've also talked about as well. Interdivision trades that they've brought up, so possibly to the Raiders or the Broncos, given their quarterback need. I just don't see that happening. It's so rare for trades like that to take place where you're giving, you know, your division rival draft capital for you. And especially where they're at, it would have to be a similar package to what Minnesota would have to give up in order to move up to 5 for the Chargers. So the Chargers are in I guess their suitors have lessened, over the last few days, for sure. But, Dan, if everything trickles right, which after we heard that the Jacksonville Jaguars had signed Mac Jones to be the backup to Trevor Lawrence, it pretty much solidifies that New England is going to take a quarterback. Even though they just signed Jacoby Brissett, they need to take a quarterback for the future, obviously. So that almost assuredly signifies quarterback 1, 2, 3. And we would assume, depending on what Arizona does, if someone wants to trade with them for whatever, if they stick and pick and it's Marvin Harrison Jr., the Chargers actually would be in a terrific spot in this circumstance. Just think about this for a second, because if they don't trade the pick and for some reason Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors are still on the board at 5, which could definitely realistically happen, you go that route. If there is a quarterback that happens to still be on the board and it doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, it goes 1, 2, 3, then wide receiver, and there's JJ McCarthy, who we have to thank Jim Harbaugh for just completely elevating his stock since he was on the Rich Eisen show. That should be the target for anybody. Because essentially now it's going to become a bidding war between who's going to be able to get to him first, between the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Vikings. The Vikings have to be in a situation where they have to go up and get this. I truly don't believe that the Broncos would want to give any draft capital to the Chargers, even if it meant going up to getting their starting quarterback.
I agree, and I don't really know what the Broncos would give the Chargers that would be enough, honestly, with what they have. Like, they just gave away so much stuff to get their coach and to get Russell Wilson, and now they're paying a boatload to see him go somewhere else. Like, it's tough. But maybe get future assets, possibly. Jorge Gomez says, or Gomez maybe? Did any team in the AFC West do anything that makes them contenders for the division? I know I will say, and it's very easy, and I've been victim of this a few times and victim's the wrong word. I have been guilty of this, where another team that the Chargers fans hate, rival, and like you find reasons to justify why it's terrible. Terrible draft or terrible free agency move. The Raiders go out and get Christian Wilkins, bona fide superstar player. The guy's a stud. And immediately you see like Chargers fans are just like finding ways to make it seem like a stupid, terrible signing. Whether it's like, all of Coupon Tom's selections turned into trash, or how could you pay that much for interior defensive line? Or, but look at the offense. Like, we can be honest here. That defensive line is going to be nasty. I tweeted about it earlier. You had people in the comments kind of saying the same thing. Wilkins and Crosby on the D-line will be a problem, says Francis. Like, that's a good move by them. We haven't really seen much by the Broncos. We have the Chargers, who I think have gotten better. But again, we're about to see kind of a Oregon Trail, if you will, of folks headed, I guess, opposite Oregon Trail.
You know that the Broncos are going to be in a wide receiver market for sure after giving away Jerry Jeudy. Absolutely. They needed to acquire draft capital.
Yep. The Chiefs, I think they have stayed put. The only name that possibly is kind of out would be L'Jarius Sneed, excuse me. They lost their punter, but they gained punt God. So, like, I think the Chiefs are still the cream of the crop, obviously. I think the Chargers have gotten better in terms of, like, ability to win games. But to answer the question, I think the Raiders got better. I think the Chargers got better. I think the Broncos are probably and the Chiefs are staying put, which is not a bad thing for them. Jake, any of the topics, thoughts, things we want to discuss before we dip on out of here after a pretty wild late start, but flurry of Chargers free agency frenzy for day one?
Dan, there was a comment in here. I was trying to find it. I lost it here. I'm going to let you answer this one because I know we've answered this, I think, during our last live show. If it came down to Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, I'm going to let you answer it this time because I answered it last time and because anybody who's watched this show knows exactly what Dan is going to say. But Dan has a good reason for it, and it makes sense. But there's also a good case to be made for Marvin Harrison Jr. as well as why it makes sense. So, Dan, by all means, if it was you at number 5 and you're Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh, who is it?
All right. I'm torn here because there's like what I would want to do with my team as my offense, and there's what I think that the Chargers will do with their offense and their coaching staff. You all heard, or if you didn't hear, go check out Haley Elwood's interview with Greg Roman, and they talked about like the brain trust, if you will, and the collaboration that the entire coaching staff is having. And that's one of the benefits that we talked about before of them having like a 30 plus large coaching staff where they can bounce ideas off each other, where it's not just one guy making decisions. It's not just Greg Roman pounding the rock 40 times a game and Chargers fans are banging their head against the wall because Justin Herbert's not doing anything. I think this will be innovative, excuse me. I think this will be more of a passing offense than Chargers fans are giving Greg Roman credit for. I think this coaching staff knows what they have in Justin Herbert. And so it then becomes, at wide receiver, what flavor do you want? I have said since December that I have Neighbors and I have Harrison in the same tier. One is not better than the other. They are different archetypes, both incredible. If I was looking for desserts, they are both equally great. Just depends on what I'm in the mood for. On one hand, you have the bona fide playmaker, the explosive, the game-changing, take the top off, one play and you're done. You have like the fireworks. You've got the highlights on SportsCenter. Like you have the bazooka cannon, if you will, that you can finally unleash Justin Herbert with speed, give him his guy in Malik Neighbors. And almost in every statistical category, he was better than Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. Period. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. is also a generational wide receiver. And you may argue that he might fit what this Chargers option or what this Chargers offense would look like, or what they envision. That not necessarily the guy who takes the top off, but the guy at the first, second, maybe third level can win any one-on-one imaginable. He might not run away from everybody, but he's going to make every catch. And the guy's a 6'4" freak athletically. And so there's a reason why he's being talked as arguably the best wide receiver prospect over the last decade, because he's that good. But they're both that good. They're just different. If it was me, I have been salivating at the idea of having a receiver like Malik Neighbors for years with Justin Herbert, and we have not had it. I would go Malik Neighbors. I think the Chargers and this regime will go Marvin Harrison Jr. But what a problem to have that you have to choose between those two.
It's not a bad problem.
But it would be so poetic, Jake. It would be so forking poetic. Those two guys on the board and the Chargers trade back. Like, I don't know, like the devil and the angel on my shoulder. I don't know which one would win that. Because on one end, I'm like so livid that instead of getting the guy that I've been hoping for years, they trade down, and they don't. But then at the same time, I'm like, dude, we haven't traded back in like 84 years. Holy hell, let's go. So, to make a long story short, I'm going Neighbors. They're probably going Harrison Jr. But win-win for the Chargers. You're either going to be able to trade back and get a haul for someone looking for a quarterback, trade back, get a haul for someone who's looking for a generational talent, or you get to pick one. Or you go Joe Alt. Daniel Jeremiah.
About wrapping up. I was going to say that about wrapping up for Chargers. Great way to end it.
No, Daniel Jeremiah actually, it's funny, replied to a quote tweet of mine from him. He had said, there are a couple people that asked this. I figured we could bring this up. Daniel Jeremiah earlier said, great nugget from NFL research. The last time there were 5 offensive tackles, at least that was their position in college. The last time 5 were selected in the first round, 4 of the 5 lined up at right tackle as rookies. This was last year. 4 of the 5 lined up as right tackles. The 5th lined up as guard, which was Karonsky. And then he says, keep that in mind the next time someone says you can't take a right tackle in the first round. Which my immediate thought was like, oh, DJ listened to the comments. He read some of those. So I then quote tweeted and said, oh, DJ punches back. To which he replied, I love Twitter. I've called the games for the last 6 years, known the GM for 20 plus years, being Ortiz, worked with him for 4 years, and I get accused of being uninformed. Gotta love it. Does that change your viewpoint, Chargers fans' viewpoint, if they were to draft a tackle to play right tackle at 5?
I don't think it's necessarily right tackle, but if you did it at 5 with who's still on the board, I think that's the other caveat to this, Dan. That's been the biggest issue. It's not necessarily taking a tackle. It's taking a tackle at 5. And I totally understand Daniel's, input on this. It makes a whole lot of sense. Even so, for the Chargers, if the Chargers are going to be drafting a tackle, let's just say in this situation at 5, then number one, with Trey Pipkin's situation, there's only one of two options here. If he remains on the roster, he immediately becomes the most expensive backup offensive lineman, I think, in the league.
$9+ million backup swing tackle.
If you choose to move off of Trey Pipkins due to his contract and him only being in the second year of a 3-year contract, you're essentially eating another $10 million in dead salary cap space. So which do you do in that circumstance? Now there was a possible scenario that Daniel had talked about with Talise Fuaga, that if you were to draft him wherever he's drafted, be it between 5, 12, whatever it may be, that you immediately start him at guard. And then if Trey Pipkins doesn't end up working out, then you immediately kick him out to the right, and there's your bookend tackles between him and Slater for the future. That made more sense to me to do that.
GS says pumpkins at swing tackle is the goal. Means you have a competent O-line. I don't disagree with that on principle, but a $10 million swing tackle is not the goal for a team that is currently still $20 million over the cap. So, I don't know. A lot of people are agreeing with us, though, Jake, or agreeing with you here. I agree that at 5, you take a wide receiver. Moving a left tackle to right tackle at 5, that's just being stupid, says Forgotten Lol Cow. HH4 says, but taking the BPA is wise. We would say this in no world is the BPA a left tackle or right tackle at that point. Kevin says, no tackle at 5. You got to take a top wide receiver. So I think Chargers fans were in a good place. Day one, again, there's still possibly more things to happen today. I don't know. I'm honestly kind of surprised, Jake, that we have not seen this Chargers team add another free agent during this, because I feel like every time we go live, something happens. Hell, it'll probably happen 3 minutes after we get off this. That's usually
day one. Day one was about the additions. Tomorrow, I think, is going to be about the subtractions.
Again, take a deep breath. Brace for impact. I am bracing. Thomas Costello, friend of the show. Spread the word. Let's get the guys to 10K. Hey, I'd appreciate it. That would
appreciate
be, if you have not already done so, please hit that like and subscribe. What you guys do for us helps us a ton. Feedback, comments, you name it, we're here for you. Jake, anything else? We went a little long here today, but it's for the people. Anything else? I know we went through a lot today. Before we get out of here.
Dan, we're in the thick of it now, baby. We're in the end game now. Let's go. Let's go. Give me to April 25th already, please.
The Chargers add Gus Edwards, Will Dissly, and re-sign Alohi Gilman. Fix the running game, help with blocking, and help shore up and keep consistency with the defensive side of the ball. We'll see what happens on the next few days, 24 hours, 48 hours. But again, it's going to be tough. Thank you to everyone who took part in this. We always love to do these live shows. You guys mean a ton to us. Please hit that like and subscribe. For those who do not already do so, you can follow Jake Hefner on X at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. We had so many people in the chat this time, Jake. We had over,
yes, we did.
I don't know what the number is, over 1,000 people going constantly. Thank you so much for tuning in Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you next time on the next Chargers Unleashed.